Unmasked. The joy of being different. One neurodivergent woman's woeful to joyful journey. The woeful part. I am a 45-year-old neurodivergent woman, and I have the British comedian and impressionist Rory Bremner to thank for coming to my own significant life-changing realisation that I have ADHD. That I probably definitely have ADHD. I'll explain this in a bit, bear with me. I remember the moment so vividly. I was in my kitchen, listening to the radio, and in a moment my life changed. Have you ever experienced a flashbulb memory? In psychology circles, this is what they call a vivid memory, one that unusually never fades with time. Psychology students read about this in textbooks that offer examples of famous moments in history, like hearing that JFK was shot, when Princess Diana had died, or 9/11. These moments that form flashbulb memories, however, can be formed in one seemingly mundane moment, notable only to one person. This was definitely one such moment I won't ever forget. In my kitchen, I stopped in my tracks. Bremner was talking about his own experiences of having ADHD, the inattentive type. In the course of my patchwork career, or my portfolio career, as I've been known to call it, to sound more grown up and functional, I'd briefly taught psychology and thought I had a reasonable understanding of what ADHD was. Yet, as Bremner described his own realisation and diagnosis of ADHD, I felt an enormous wave of familiarity, a sudden and hugely disturbing realisation that everything he was saying resonated with my own experiences. Could I have this inattentive type of ADHD too? I was simultaneously horrified and intrigued. At that time, I was a new mum and I was struggling. Really, really struggling. I felt a daily sense of failure, inadequacy, and frustration. I'd become pregnant quickly after a miscarriage, and perhaps because of this, I'd experienced postpartum anxiety so profoundly that for her first year with us, I couldn't talk about my infant daughter in the future tense. I simply couldn't believe that she would survive. I had no doubt that something terrible would happen to her, and it was just a matter of time. Meanwhile, whilst I fought back my intense fears, and in the midst of sleep deprivation, I tried really, really hard to just get on with living and doing the things other mums were doing, wondering how the hell these other mums could even get out of the house with a baby, let alone make it to places on time, wearing clean clothes, with clean hair, and having eaten. If I got a wash load on, it felt like a miracle. If I didn't have to then repeat the wash load and manage to hang the clothes up to dry before the wet dog smell kicked in, it was a double miracle. It's fair to say then that I was not in the best of mental health at the time this realisation hit. In that already very negative frame of mind, contemplating being a person with ADHD felt like a hammer blow to my fragmented sense of self as I struggled with my own motherhood journey. It was a painful vindication of a deeply felt and familiar sense that I was less than, different, and fundamentally flawed, or so I had always believed. Given my lifelong tendency to look anywhere except on the bright side, with this new ADHD realisation, I peered back at my life and felt subsumed by a crushing shame at opportunities lost and unmet high expectations. It was painful. It hurt too that though it made so much sense to me, many close to me were highly sceptical, disinterested, dismissive, or all of the above once I'd summoned up the courage to share with them what, to me, was such a seismic revelation. If you're starting to negatively spiral in sympathy for this new mum version of me, I am immediately going to stop you there and assure you that I could not feel more differently about being a neurodivergent woman now compared to how I did back then. Doom, gloom, and self-pity have largely been relegated to occasional visitors, and there are some pretty firm boundaries in place when they choose to come knocking. Diagnosis. I do need to address why I've used the word probable, and you may have guessed, I do not have any formal diagnosis of neurodivergence. I know some listeners may feel the need to press stop right now and wonder who the hell I am to think I have the right to speak on this subject, but I urge you, please, do hear me out, the Bremer bombshell meant that suddenly my whole life, going way back to the midst of the browns and oranges of my 1980s early childhood, now made sense. I firmly recognise that such a powerful moment of insight, recognition and knowing does not need anyone else's corroboration. If it fits, it fits. At that time, however, I did want confirmation, so I completed ADHD self-assessments online, the results of which suggested I met the profile for someone with inattentive type ADHD, once called ADD. I dutifully went to my GP here in the UK and asked for a referral. 4 years went by, during which significant personal life events and larger global pandemic events came to pass, and then eventually I was contacted to follow up on my referral, with an irony that's surely not going to be lost on anyone who sees themselves as having ADHD, diagnosed or not. When I didn't complete the questionnaires that were required before assessment, I was booted off the service and told I would need to request a new referral and start again right back at the beginning. A rose by any other name, my ADHD was certainly made even more legitimate in my own eyes by the nature of failing the diagnosis process. And a note to all assessment providers, if you want ADHD questionnaires completed for the love of all that is holy, please provide your clients with a deadline. So, no diagnosis. The joyful part. 9 years after becoming a mum, I am now a joy and transformation coach. My high-level anxiety is in the past, and for the vast majority of the time, I bloody love who I am. I'm not seeking medication right now. No shade to anyone who does medicate for ADHD. I just don't have that particular desire. Please know I am absolutely pro doing whatever the fuck you want with your own life and body. And I don't need a piece of paper or the words of a medical professional to confirm what I already know to be true. As the years have gone by, I've also realised that my own neurodivergence is a mix of contrasting and often opposing ADHD and autistic traits, and every day I learn more about what taking off my masks looks like and how to move through this life authentically as me. Why I'm probably not about to become your go-to ADHD or autism expert. I believe the term hyperactivity can cause endless confusion to anyone being diagnosed or coming to realise they have ADHD who doesn't recognise within themselves the image of a naughty kid, the stereotype of a boy unable to stop fidgeting, blurting things out or running around the playground long enough to focus on getting any work done. I was a fidgety kid who loved nothing better than running around the playground, and whilst I did have a tendency to blurt things out and talk in class, I was not typically naughty. I was a girl. I was a high achiever in many ways, a voracious reader who could get lost for hours in a book, pick up a musical instrument and play it, sprint fast and impress adults with a talent for conversation. If I sound a bit full of myself, I was already internalising bucket loads of shame, and I was just about the most nervous kid you could ever meet, so swings and roundabouts. I was also a kid regularly to be found slumped, literally upside down, feet over the top of the sofa, head touching the floor, watching TV, yes, upside down TV, for as long as I could humanly get away with. I was sometimes fidgety, sometimes caught in a perpetual loop of turning somersaults back and forth across my parents' double bed, such a beautiful full body stim, whilst at many other times I resembled nothing so much as an upside down sloth. My name and lazy were firm friends in the mouths of others. I even attracted the most desirable of nicknames by my family. I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, but I am committed to being honest. They called me Pooh Child. Why? If it was time for my family to go somewhere, I'd no doubt be keeping everyone waiting, sat on the loo. A heady cocktail of IBS, hyperfixation on whatever I was reading at that time, and time blindness meant the whole household would be ready at the door whilst I languished in the toilet. It was also a brilliant place to find some peace and quiet away from everything that was overstimulating. And it definitely didn't look like hyperactivity. I'm also less than convinced by the heavy focus of attention in the ADHD name. I have exquisite powers of attention, thank you. Just it's not always focused where it might most usefully be directed. I most resonate with those who describe ADHD as cognitive dysregulation. That makes much more sense to me. But it's not my intention to be a source material for understanding ADHD, being autistic and ADHD, and we're all in luck because there are so many absolutely brilliant resources out there, far more knowledgeable than me. Of all the times to get an adult diagnosis or not to get a diagnosis, this is surely the best there's been. There are wonderful experts who articulately explain masking, the symptoms, and what it means to have an executive function that likes to make executive decisions not to function. Experts who may even have an answer to explain what absolute trickery takes place when we triple book ourselves to be in 3 different places with 3 different people next Tuesday afternoon. Movements online such as Actually Autistic have done an excellent job of amplifying the voices of autistic people over well-meaning neurotypical workers and family members. Focus on finding cures or modifying the behaviour of autistic people to fit in have been openly rejected by the people who were meant to benefit, and there is a real movement of pride for neurodivergent people. Personally, I think I hover somewhere between feeling pretty neutral and feeling proud. I love that there are superpowers, and at the same time, I don't feel that it's helpful to dismiss how challenging being neurodivergent can be. It is what it is. I urge you, if you haven't already, to find your tribe of educators online, the autistic, the ADHD, the ADHD experts, and if what they have to say helps and makes you feel you understand yourself better, give them a follow. The joy! What I am here to do is to focus on joy. Knowing how woeful can become joyful, I'm on a mission to help other people come to terms with and embrace their own neurodivergence and reconnect to joy, to connect to the unbound version of themselves. You may or may not recognise parts of yourself from my own journey. My experience is not your experience. We are all likely to have found different ways to mask, different strategies to cope and fit in. I lost self-confidence very early on, and that followed me through life, as sensitive as a peach and quick to tears. Although I'd bet money on it that we've all internalised societal shame about our differences, how we've lived out the impact from that shame will look different for all of us. You may have become the class clown, making people laugh so they wouldn't notice how confused or overwhelmed you felt inside. You may have become a high achiever, burning yourself out with perfectionism in order to feel worthy and to prove that you were doing fine. You may have often zoned out, got lost in daydreams or fantasy worlds where everything made more sense. You may have masked by mirroring others so completely that now, as an adult, you're unsure who you actually are. You may have been labelled as lazy or disruptive, when in truth your nervous system was in constant overload. You may have over-controlled everything, your body, your environment, your emotions, all to try and stay one step ahead of chaos. You may have rejected all structure, struggling to follow any rules or routines because they felt suffocating and arbitrary. You may have avoided asking for help, terrified it would expose your difference. You may have chronically people-pleased, becoming whatever others needed you to be, even at the cost of your own needs. You may have shut down, kept quiet, and avoided attention, afraid that if people looked too closely, they'd see just how different you really were. You may have developed a harsh inner critic who shamed you before anyone else ever had the chance to. You may have leaned into rebellion, deciding early on that if you couldn't belong, you'd at least be free. What I can assure you is that I've witnessed the limitless joy inside every neurodivergent person I've ever coached. Though buried under the weight of a heavy dose of lack of self-esteem and a huge pile of self-criticism, I'm absolutely delighted to assure you that even after a lifetime of feeling wrong, of endless painful comparisons with others, and of hearing criticism where there should only have been love and support, learning to like and even love yourself is absolutely possible. For me, I find joy in moving my body. Dancing, playing in water, and running fast all bring a huge grin to my face. Discovering new and exciting places to explore, with a safe base to retreat back to for extended siestas with a bag of crisps and an absorbing novel brings me huge amounts of joy. A chance to pet a dog, to jump on a trampoline with my daughter, bypass small talk for deep conversations, listen to music louder than is good for my ears, and get lost on a sober dance floor all bring me joy. I want you to focus on your joy. I want you to prioritise joy like your life depends on it. I want you to know that for every moment when life is not so joyful, that you get to forgive yourself, love yourself, and choose to bring your focus and attention back as quickly as possible again onto joy. I know that for many reading, the idea of self-love, self-forgiveness, and reveling in joy may quite frankly sound impossible, if not actually selfish. It's my life's work to show that's not true. And I want to be clear that I don't believe we are all starting from the same place. There is no level playing field. And I say this as a white, middle-class, cisgender woman, therefore someone who moves through the world with a great deal of privilege. I fully acknowledge that global majority women, trans women, disabled women, and others with marginalised identities often face additional barriers, risks, and injustices, especially when navigating neurodivergence in systems that were not designed with them in mind. Joy, authenticity, and self-acceptance should be accessible to all, but I know that the path to them is more obstructed for some than for others. That matters, and it must be named. With this awareness, I hold on to the belief that mindset shifts are powerful for everyone. We cannot control the systems we live within, but we can choose how we speak to ourselves, how we understand our needs, and how we relate to our own differences. I acknowledge that the inner work that I believe is so important that it has now become my life's work to facilitate in others can't erase oppression. But, importantly, this work supports efforts to erase oppression and has the power to shift what is possible for any individual. I also want to acknowledge that there are some elements of living as a neurodivergent woman that aren't particularly joyful in and of themselves. The more we understand neurodivergence, the more we understand it's a whole body experience. I have IBS and I can be really unpleasant to be around in the run-up to my period. Overstimulation is hugely painful to experience. That said, even my experiences of IBS, my premenstrual suffering, and the frequency of finding myself in a state of overwhelm have reduced enormously thanks to my inner work. And I know it's possible for you too. So what did I actually do? Moving from woeful to joyful was not a steady path. I experienced some moments of huge shifts, whilst other realisations were slow burners. If I were to say I took consistent small actions daily, I would be lying. Whilst my autistic traits might welcome more consistency day to day, the ADHD in me largely repels any attempts at consistency. My violin teacher can attest to that, each week turning up having yet again forgotten to practice. Through peaks and waves of inner work since June 2021, my life has been on an upward trajectory of finding more joy as I've learnt how to shift my attention away from self-pity, cynicism, difficulties, and challenges. From the perspective of having lived through these changes and carrying out inner work, I do have a lot of clarity looking back to understand what needed to shift. And I have the humility to own that I will always have more work to do, more insights to gain, and more breakthroughs to experience. I learned to forgive myself. I learned to recognise when my inner voice was needlessly harsh. I recognised the patterns in my thinking that were cutting me off from experiencing joy. I allowed others to guide me to think about what new patterns would serve me better, and I tried them out for size. I invested in myself. I made new and often quite scary decisions and chose to prioritise my mental health. I allowed myself to consider new viewpoints and trust that other people might be able to teach me a thing or two. I allowed myself to be vulnerable and sought out communities of people who offered me support and really listened and were strong enough in their own sense of self to point out where I was letting myself down. Nothing that I've done to shift from woeful to joyful is exclusive for neurodivergent women. I know that the sort of inner work and shifts I'm talking about here benefit everyone, and I see just how needed it is for women like us. It's no surprise to me that larger numbers of the women I've met through coaching have been neurodivergent. I don't know your story, but I do know this. You are not broken, and you never were. It's not too late to build a life that feels comforting and nourishing, where you know you belong. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. You are allowed to be different. You get to be joyful. You get to be you. If any of what I've shared has resonated with you, I've created a space for women like us to explore, celebrate, and grow. And if you'd like to join me, follow the link in my email. Come be yourself. With love and joy, Jen.